I need an intro. Hi, loves. Today I want to talk to you guys about depression and emotional crashes. Pretty much everybody who knows me knows that I struggle with depression. It's not something I keep quiet about, really ever. I have had a very long battle with mental illness. I first figured out that I had depression when I was 10, and when I was probably about 14 or so, I started realizing that something that had been plaguing me for my entire life was very strong symptoms of anxiety. My battle with these things, and with various other things, is ongoing, and it's pretty intense. A bunch of you guys have been with me over the last year. You know a whole bunch of the stuff I've dealt with, some of the junk I've gone through. Hasn't been pretty. That's okay. That's what this stuff brings with it. There's a reason I talk about this to pretty much anyone who asks. A few people who don't. They get to hear about it anyways. But I talk about it because that's how I get power over it. Keeping these things in the dark, keeping quiet about them, is not a good idea. I mean, you don't have to be on the rooftops shouting to the world that I have depression, but if you keep it to yourself and keep it locked up inside, then it just has power over you. Then that puts that in charge. And when you talk about it, kind of shrink things down to size and makes it a little easier to manage and a little more, I don't know, harmless, maybe? When I was younger, when I started figuring out what these things were, what I was dealing with, I went to other people. I really did. Right from the start, I went to other people. I went to leaders at my church, was a big thing, leaders at my youth group. I went to my friends. We were all 12. None of them had answers for me. But the people who were older than me that I went to, they didn't really have any answers for me either. And that was really, really hard. I didn't know what depression was until I was 12 years old. I had never heard the word before. I don't even remember how I heard it. It just kind of popped up on my radar one day with a mild definition, and I was like, that's the thing. That's the thing. Who knew? But when I was a kid, we were still very much in the point of nobody talking about it. There wasn't really any representation. No one was bringing it into main conversation. So no one really knew how to help me. Like I said, I was a kid when I figured out what this was. I didn't really know what it was, and I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't have the right language to tell people what this crazy darkness in my head was like. And partially because of that, and partially because the people I went to didn't really have that much experience with it, I got nowhere. I didn't get any answers. I didn't walk away feeling like someone understood. And so I shut it down. And for years and years, I kept that to myself. I didn't try to tell anybody. There was a point when I talked to my parents about it, and they told me I was just feeling sad, and that it was a phase, and that it would go away. It'd be fine. I would get over it. But I knew in those conversations that we hadn't met up. They were talking about one thing, I was talking about another, and those had not met each other. And that is really, really scary for a kid to feel. But those times did pass. When I was about 14, maybe just before I turned 14, there was a time I bombed. I completely wiped out. My mental health was just non-existent. And I went to my current small group at the time and told them, I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. Can anyone help me? They weren't the right people to go to at that time. They cared, honestly they did, but they weren't the right type of people and they didn't have the tools to help me. But one of my friends told her parents what had happened, and they told my parents. So, the next week, my parents took me out for dinner and sat me down and told me that 2 days later, they were taking me to see a therapist. Therapy was not something I had any experience with. I didn't know if anyone in my family had ever had any experience with it themselves. And I didn't want to go. Flat out, I think I actually just told my parents, no, I'm not going. But I was 14 and didn't have too much say in the matter. So I went. And that is one of the best things that has ever happened to me. My parents took me to a therapist in Brantford that a person from our church had recommended to them and said she was great. It was the perfect person to take me to. And it was good. It was... Now that I think back over it, I don't know why I was scared about it. It was what I needed. And it was definitely worth it. I went to her for about 2 years, and then I said, hey, I'm doing a lot better. I think I need to take a break for now. I think I'm okay. I think if I need to come back, I will come back. But other than that, I'm doing pretty good. And I was. For about 6 months. I was 16 at the time, almost 17. And some stuff happened. Not gonna go into all of it here. Don't need to relive all of that. A lot of you know stuff that happened about a year later. Not even a year later. A few months later, I was in the hospital. I had gone back to that therapist 2 months before that happened. I had gone to my mom and said, hey, something's not right again. I need to go back to therapy. After I was in the hospital, I went to 2 therapists at the same time, one in London and one in Brantford, for 6 months. And then, in April, I graduated. I stopped going to my therapist in Brantford, and I was just seeing the one therapist every other week. So that was a big step for me. 6 months, therapy every week, like clockwork, and then it was every other week, and I was doing better. Which was really, really cool. As someone who has dealt with this darkness in their head for years and years without the language to understand it, finding everything out on my own, finding some relief from that and understanding it and knowing how to get myself out of these dark places, it's like coming to life for the first time. And today, probably a couple of days ago by the time I post this, but today I hit another milestone. I had my final therapy session today. I'm done going to see a therapist for now. I'm doing the best I've ever done in my life, which, honestly, my anxiety makes me scared of saying things like that. It makes me scared of saying things like, yes, I'm doing good, this is good, my life is good right now. Because I'm afraid that if I say that, something will happen and all of that will be taken away. And maybe something will happen. I can't say that it won't. I have no control over things. I don't know what's going to happen. But right now, in this moment, I'm good. I'm happy. Which feels really, really good to say. But this brings me to the topic of emotional crashes. And emotional crashes are something that have affected me for a really long time. It's not per se a mental health issue, it's more just an emotional thing that happens to a lot of people. Despite my successes with therapy, not necessarily despite, but I am currently in a season of depression. That's something that happens for me. Beginning of summer, usually for the whole summer, that's when my seasonal depression really sets in, which is weird because it's like the off season for everybody. But even though I am depressed, I'm still okay. And I still know how to deal with things. I wanted to make this video about emotional crashes today because I went through a massive emotional crash this afternoon. When I was a kid, I didn't know what emotional crashes were. I really kind of came up with the term for emotional crashes on my own, just so that I would have a name for it. But an emotional crash is when you're at a really high point, you're feeling great. Think of it like being at the top of like a roller coaster. Right at the top of the hill, your hands are in the air, the wind's in your hair, and you feel great. And then you go down, and you just plummet, and all of a sudden you feel like absolute garbage. Like you just want to go to bed and not talk to anybody for a year. And you don't know what just happened. Emotional crash really is not the best name for it because that's not really how your emotions work. Extreme emotions are not, one is up here, one is down here, or, one's at this end, one's at that end. They're right next to each other. So it's really easy to go from being really happy to really sad because they're right next to each other. So really, you're not falling off a cliff, you're stepping a foot over to the left. There are things you can do to get out of emotional crashes. Music is a thing I use in a lot of different situations to stabilize my mood, and emotional crashes, they're no exception. But there are other things you can do. Not everything works for everybody. There are a lot of things I do: listening to music, reading a book, spending time outside, texting someone, doing a workout, going for a walk, anything like that. Being outside, listening to music, and talking to other people. That is extremely vital to stuff like this. This is not something you can keep to yourself. A lot of times, if you don't want people to know what your emotional state is every second of the day, that's okay. You don't need to have everybody know constantly, oh, I was happy, but now I'm angry, and now I'm hungry, and now I'm sad. Like, you don't have to broadcast it. But keeping people up to speed on just how you're doing in the wide range, that's good. That's a really good thing to do. I have multiple people who I know, if I'm not feeling great, I can just message them and say, hey, I'm not doing good. Tell me a story. Send me a funny picture. Just something. I just need something to keep me going right now. And that's an incredibly important thing to have. If you don't have people like that in your life, find someone. I know it's hard. It took me years and years and years before I found the group of people that I have now. But you will find them, and they will be there for you whenever you need them. As with all things, there are other people who experience these things. I know right now my YouTube audience is really, really small, and I think I probably know all of you in real life. I doubt there's anyone who's subscribed to me that I've never met before. But who knows what can happen. Maybe someday I'll have a bigger audience full of dozens of kids and dozens of teenagers and young adults, and maybe there'll be people who are dealing with stuff like this who have never talked to anyone about it. And with the way the mental health situation in the world is going, I hope that won't be the case. I really do. I hope no one ever needs this video. I hope no one ever has this as the only thing in their life that has ever given them information about this thing they're dealing with. But if you're watching this and you have depression, have anxiety, have suicidal urges, have emotional crashes, anything like that, and no one's ever talked to you about it, find someone. There is someone close to you, I promise you, who is dealing with this, who knows someone who has dealt with this, who has experience. You are never alone in anything you're going through. As a kid who went through this for so many years alone, if I can keep one single person from going through that, that will make everything worth it to me. So, if anyone needs someone to talk to, if you need information about any of these mental health issues, give me a text. Let me know if I can help, if I can give you a listening ear, point you in the direction of some information, and I will happily do that, because no one deserves to go through any of this alone. Definitely not kids like me. So why did I make this video? I'm pretty sure I just said all of it. I made this video because I needed to. Because I had a good day that turned into a kind of bad day. And talking about stuff like this is what gives you the power over it. My wish in life is to help people. I want to be someone who, when you talk to me, when you hear something I've said, if you think of me, anything like that, I want people to be able to walk away from me saying, that made me feel better. That person makes me feel good to be around. And fingers crossed, I do that for people. I hope. If not, I'm working on it. And the internet's a big place. You can take things down, but nothing's really ever erased forever. So I want to spend my time here with my currently limited YouTube audience talking about important stuff right away. There's no point in waiting. There's no point in putting it off and pretending it doesn't exist, because it does. People need to hear about it. And yeah, we're making progress, but we could always do better. So, this is me talking about it. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.